Hello everyone, this is LockOS, and welcome back to my series on mission editing, and in this case we're going to be going over the F-14B Tomcat. We're going to go over mission editing and loadout notes. As always, I should mention at the start of these videos, if you build any loadouts in your mission, you can easily port them over into your multiplayer and single-player games, and they'll show up as custom loadouts that you designed. So you can always have fun playing with loadouts here in the mission editor. Let's get to covering the weapons of the F-14 Tomcat, because that's where there's quite a bit to go over. You have these two stations here on the wings, 1 and 8, and 1A and 8A of those two are Sidewinder only stations. You can mount smoke winders and ACMI pods, which are kind of more aesthetic, but your main purpose for these two stations, 1A and 8A, are going to be mounting AIM-9Ms. Be careful that you do not mount a captive AIM-9M. The captive AIM-9M is a blue Sidewinder, and it's a training variant of the Sidewinder that is non-functional. So don't go into I can't tell you how many times I've seen some poor soul go into combat with a single functional AIM-9M and a single captive AIM-9M. So make certain that your AIM-9Ms are the functional variant before you take off. Also, the icon here in the mission loadout page will turn from black to blue. It's a little hard to see, but if you squint hard enough, you can tell that it's blue. So if it's an off-shaded color, just mouse over it and double check to make certain that it's a non-training version of the weapon. For instance, here in training, it shows up as a captive AIM-9M. Now, these 1B and 8B are where things get really interesting. Now, I will start off by saying, for all of my loadouts, I generally keep 1B and 8B as Sparrow mounts, just because in that case, you'll have, no matter what you put in the tunnel of the aircraft, which is the area between the two engines of the Tomcat. This is called the tunnel. And I believe these are called the glove pylons here. No matter what you mount in the tunnel, if you have a Sparrow on 1B and 8B, you will always have two Sidewinders for close in-range engagements, and then two Sparrows for engaging targets a little bit further out. So you will always, if you always have these two, always have this combination of exterior missiles, you will always at least be able to defend yourself in combat. Now, that being said, you can actually equip Phoenixes on these exterior rails. That is an option. You can also equip bombs of various sizes up to a Mark 83. It will get pretty draggy, however, because it can't mount directly onto the pylon. It has to actually use a turret ejector to mount a single bomb, and I'll admit, even aesthetically, it just looks weird. But you can do it. You can also mount two Mark 82s on that triple ejector rack here on that pylon. Again, it kind of looks a bit weird hanging off that low, and it is kind of draggy because it is pretty low, and you also have to deal with that triple ejector rack there. But that is an option if you need it. Also to note, on this pod down here, you can mount rocket pods, and you can mount two Zuni Lao 10 pods for a total of 8 rockets on that pylon, and you can mount another 2 on that side for a total of 8 Zuni rockets. So that is a bit more of a useful option, and generally, if I'm going to forego the Sparrows on the wingtips and go for a more of a air-to-ground focused loadout, I generally will go for Zunis on the wingtip mounts, as well as Zunis in the tunnel, and then have a single Sparrow in the back, which I'll showcase in a little bit. So let's go ahead here and mount a Sparrow. And I should also mention, DCS, you have, for the Tomcat, you do have F variant Sparrows and M variant and MH. MH is basically a home on jam capable Sparrow that you can equip. I just like to go for standard M's just because I don't really usually encounter any homing on jamming targets, so I'll just go for M. And we're now going to go on to Station 2 and 7. These the only purpose that these two serve is to mount the fuel tanks. You can mount full fuel tanks, and generally for pretty much every loadout, you'll want to have Station 2 and 7 equipped with a full 30-gallon fuel tank. If you are doing a refueling operation, or you're trying to train yourself to refuel the Tomcat, you can always set max internal fuel or nearly max internal fuel, and then go ahead and give yourself empty external fuel tanks so you can practice filling up you can practice refueling with a lot of internal fuel to play around with. You can also, by the way, remove the pylon, and it will remove the pylon for the Tomcat. I do believe this is historically accurate for Iranian Tomcats, so you can definitely have your Tomcats looking clean on the bottom right there. Or if you have some kind of aesthetic vision in mind, so you can definitely have this is like an Ustio Air Force Tomcat, so you can, there's obviously, since it's Ustio is a fictional country, you can kind of do whatever you want with those drop tanks down there, but extra fuel for the Tomcat's never a bad thing, and the Tomcat kind of pretty much always has had them throughout history, or its flight operation, except if they were flying the Iranian variant. So I always just equip them just because extra fuel on a basically free pylon never hurts. Because that's all 2 and 7 are good for, or the fuel tanks. Now we get to the very interesting bit, the tunnel mounts. So the nomenclature kind of bounces around here between 3, 4, 5, and 6. 3 is for with the Max 37, sorry, the Max 79 mount, which is, I believe, what this is called here. That becomes 3, that becomes 4, that becomes 5, and that becomes 6. However, notice that if you remove the Phoenix mounting rails, you actually have a bit of a different loadout, and that becomes, I believe, 3, that becomes 6, that becomes 4, and that becomes 5. And this only really matters when you're mounting Sparrows. So let's go ahead and I'll remount quickly these AIM 54C Phoenixes. And I should also mention that with the Phoenixes, A models are analog seekers, and C models are digital seekers. Mark 47 engines have a smoke trail. Mark 60 engines do not have a smoke trail. So your most modern variant is the 54C Mark 60. That is a visual bug. I do believe when you load into the mission, they add in the Phoenix rail afterwards. So, on that note, this is actually a fairly normal loadout and historical loadout for the Tomcat. While the Tomcat can equip 6 Phoenixes in total, it did actually tax the Tomcat's cooling system, and I do believe that there were certain cases where the Tomcats for photo ops were equipped with 6 Phoenixes to showcase that they could do them. However, in a couple of cases that they did that, and they flew in very hot weather, the pilots basically cooked themselves. They weren't harmed, but they were very much sweaty, hot messes afterwards, because the Tomcat's cooling system couldn't cool the pilots and all 6 Phoenix missiles at the same time. So the 4 Phoenixes in the middle is a more balanced loadout and is actually very historical. Plus, if you do get into a BVR fight in the Tomcat, having the 4 Phoenix missiles to shoot off at targets to get to have your extra range, engage your targets with the 4 Phoenixes at range, and then going in then to clean up with 2 Sparrows and then 2 Sidewinders is an ideal loadout, because then if you try to go in with 6 Phoenixes, you fire them all off and they all whiff, or some of them whiff and some of them hit, and you still have to deal with fair-sized targets, you're potentially going into a dogfight with only 2 AIM-9s against opponents that may have Fox 1s, and you have no counter to those Fox 1s. So this is my recommended air-to-air loadout if you want to do long bombs with Fox 3s. It's not my favorite loadout, however, for air-to-air, which I'll showcase in a little bit. So we're going to go here, and we'll just go over here and we'll go actually talk about that loadout right now, actually. My favorite air-to-air loadout, and the one that I prefer to fly on most servers with, is the as a full Sparrow loadout. This way you have 6 Sparrows and 2 AIM-9Ms. This way, there's the servers I fly on, namely Lima Kilo and the Flashpoint Levant server. It does tax you for using the AIM-54 Phoenixes. So having a pure AIM-7 loadout kind of avoids that issue. You don't have to worry about point cost. You also don't have to worry about, in this case, lobbing an extremely heavy, slow missile against a fighter-sized target in a dogfight. While the AIM-54 Phoenix is good against bombers and larger fighter-sized targets, the Sparrow tends to perform, I find slightly better against maneuvering fighter-sized targets. Not that the Phoenix isn't capable of doing that. It's just the Sparrow I find is a lot more effective against them, and to be honest, it's a lot more fun because depending on what server you're up against and what your opponents are flinging at you, using the AIM-54 Phoenix is kind of a bit of a cheat code because there's nothing in DCS that can outrange a Phoenix. So this is my favorite air-to-air loadout. Another reason why I kind of like this loadout is because if I go here and remove the number 5 missile and the... Oh, so number 4 is the rear missile. 3 and 6. You'll notice that I have all the space up here in the front. And what you can do is go ahead and add in your Zuni rocket pods up front. So you can have 3 Zuni pods up front for a total of 12 Zuni rockets, while still maintaining a single Sparrow in the back for self-defense in the tunnel, as well as 2 on the wings. Or if you want to go for a full rocket loadout, you can have a grand total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Zuni pods, all with 4 Zuni rockets apiece, with 2 A9 Sidewinders and a single Sparrow for self-defense. So this is a really... I like this for attacking a whole bunch of light armor and unarmored units. You can also... we'll get these back on here for the moment. Go ahead here and actually equip another... not really infamous, but useful loadout. You can also mount GBU 10s up here. I'll get to talking more about the GBU bombs later, but the GBU 10s are only able to be mounted on the front 2 pylons in the Tomcat, so you can have 3 Sparrows and 2 GBU 10s without a Lantern targeting pod. And let's start talking about that Lantern targeting pod and GBUs. So remove that Sparrow. So like I mentioned, you can only mount 2 GBU 10s on the front side of the tunnel here. You can mount a total of 4 GBU 16s as well. So if you want to have 4 GBUs, you can mount 4 GBU 12s or 4 GBU 16s. So at that point, you're only really asking yourself if you just... do you really need the 1,000-pound bomb, or can you get away with a 500-pound GBU 12? Makes the aircraft a little bit lighter, doesn't add as much drag, so you can get a little bit more performance, and you don't have to worry about fuel as much, although you shouldn't really with the Tomcat with its insane fuel weight of 20,000 pounds. Also to note, if you want to carry GBUs, you'll want to equip on 8B the Lantern targeting pod, unless you have a local JTAC, either human controlled or AI controlled. This way you can self-designate your targets with the Lantern pod on 8B. Keep in mind, this is the only station that can mount the Lantern targeting pod. So if you're going to be orbiting your target, you want to basically get into a right-hand orbit over your target. Let's slap the Sparrow back on there. Also, to mention, you can carry 2 bunker busters in the F-14 Tomcat. You have to pick the right one. I do believe it's Station 5. It is a bit of an odd duck here with the loadout here. but you can have two GBU-24 bunker buster bombs. You can also then have a GBU-16 on the rear station here, and then I believe on station 4 up front. No, station 6 up front. Got myself there. You can mount a GBU-10, so you can have a pretty interesting, if oddly balanced loadout of a 24, a 10 up front, and then a 24 and a 16 in the back. I generally try not to mix my bombs this way in the Tomcat much, just because it becomes a little bit more difficult to manage, and just keep in mind of what you have in store. Plus, it's kind of a little bit odd in the sense that unless you're purposely planning on targeting 2 bunkers and then a large target and then like a medium-sized target, there's not really much point to this loadout. I would try to keep the loadout fairly clean if I could in that case, because these are fairly heavy bombs. So we'll just go ahead. So if I want to do a bunker buster loadout, I would just do 2 24s and leave the rest of the pylons clean. That way you're not losing too much performance with carrying extra unneeded munitions. Plus, that way you have one ability. You can attack one bunker with the bomb, or you can have 2 chances to attack the same bunker. But keep in mind that if you've noticed, by the way, if you notice that the Tomcat really isn't capable of doing a whole lot of precision attack compared to other aircraft, you are right. No matter what with your loadout when it comes to precision guided bombs, you're only going to have the ability to attack 4 targets. So just keep in mind with the Tomcat, you're only you're basically limited to 4 drops of guided munitions, and then you're returning back to base. Unguided bombs, however, are something that you might find useful then as a Tomcat pilot, because you can end up carrying quite a whole lot. You want to use, you can mount these bombs as single rails. For instance, if you want to carry 4 Mark 84s, you can here. So you can carry 4 single Mark 84 bombs. And if you're attacking a lot of large infrastructure targets like factories on Flashpoint Levant, or even Enigma's Cold War if they allow the Tomcat, or some other server like even Georgia at War or the like, a Mark 84 dropped from a Tomcat can be pretty accurate with the Tomcat's TCP dropping computer. So you can easily get a 4 strike targets knocked out with your Mark 84s. So that is an option for unguided bombs. So you can carry up to 4 Mark 84s. However, using the Mac 79 mounting option, you can get access to basically a crap ton of smaller bombs. So we can have, for instance, a total of the Mark, let's see here, get these all in here. I believe you can have a total of 14 Mark 82 series bombs for a ton of death and destruction using your simple Mark 82 500-pound bomb. That also comes in the Snake Eye and Balut flavor. You can also mount Mark 81s if you feel it's particularly spicy, and you also feel like for whatever reason you need to gain a little bit more performance. You don't need quite the strength of a Mark 82. You can load up a bunch of Mark 81s. However, don't get your hopes up too much about this bomb. It can be effective, but it's a very, very small payload, and they don't use them too much anymore for various reasons. Also, you can equip cluster munitions. Not as many, but you can also equip your Mark 28 Rockeye cluster bombs. One of my favorite loadouts for the Tomcat, by the way, is one of my favorites is basically maxing out on Mark 83s, which you can do this way. And this grants you a total of 8 Mark 83 bombs. You can also mount an additional 2 Mark 82s on the wingtips for a total of 10. So you can end up carrying quite a lot of Mark 82s into battle. Just keep in mind that if you mount them on the wings, you're losing your self-defense Sparrows, and you're down to self-defense, aim 9, M Sidewinders, which isn't the worst, but again, you're in the Tomcat. You generally want to keep at least one Sparrow around for self-defense if you're going into an area that might be contested. Lastly, to note, there is an air-to-ground missile called the ADM-141A. This is the TALD, Tactical Air Launch Decoy, and this is useful to carry along if you are supporting a seed mission. Unlike the Hornet, though, which it shares now finally the same functionality and features with, because they're now both using the same model and weapon in game. The TALD can only carry a maximum of 4 TALDs here on the Tomcat. The Hornet can carry a total, I believe, of 12. So you're definitely limited in the amount of TALDs you can carry in the Tomcat, but at the very least, as a Tomcat pilot, you can equip your TALD. You can at least carry 4 TALDs, deploy them into a area where there's a SAM network, and then basically then switch to a escort role with your 2 Sparrows and your 2 Sidewinders, whereas then your Hornets can specialize more in offensive weapon, air-to-ground weaponry with Mavericks and Harms. So you can definitely do this in more of a support role and still be capable of being very effective in an escort role. And that's it for loadouts for the Tomcat here as far as ordnance goes. Going over to the loadout page here, internal fuel, always just have that set to 100. No reason not to drop it any lower than that unless you're trying to recreate something in DCS World or do some other oddball thing. Chaff and flare are fixed, but there are other ways to adjust them here in the additional properties. You can't manually type in a chaff and flare value. Gun ammo, just always had that set to 100. Tomcat, I believe, comes standard with roughly 600 rounds of gun ammo. Standard gun ammo type for your Tomcat's going to be high explosive incendiary for air-to-air targets and unarmored and lightly armored air-to-ground targets. You can equip armor-piercing incendiary rounds for if you think you're going to be fighting more ground units, but generally strafing in the Tomcat is kind of hard because of the gun is pointed upwards to engage in air-to-air targets. So I would generally stick to just high explosive incendiary, and you'll be fine for almost everything you want to do in the Tomcat. Moving on now to navigation and fixed target fixed points. This is something very useful for the Tomcat. The Tomcat has the ability into its mission computer to add 3 waypoints only. So you might think, oh, that sounds very limiting. I only have access to 3 numbered waypoints. But how you add more waypoints into the Tomcat's computer through the mission editor is to set up navigation target points. And these actually set up special waypoints in the Tomcat that the Tomcat can navigate to, but also show up on its radar and its radar screen that basically give you more information about like what an area is really. So you can set up for instance, a navigation point out here in this hostile area, and you can add the waypoint there, and then go to edit and add in the comment with the appropriate code, and it'll pop up in the Tomcat's navigation database as hostile area, and on the radar screen it'll have its own unique icon. And there's a whole bunch of different ones. Some of the more popular and useful ones that I find are HA for hostile area, so you can denote that an area is full or predicted to be full of hostile aircraft. You can use then IP for initial point, so basically you can have 2 navigation waypoints to get yourself to the target, and then you can have an IP waypoint for your initial point to line up for your bomb run. And speaking of the bomb run itself, you can have a surface target special navigation point for your actual ground attack target if you're doing a bombing run. You can have defended point, or DP, which I have here in the mission editor here, to denote basically an area that you either have to defend or a point that is defended by a friendly SAM network. And let's see here, 3 IP, that's your initial point. can also have data link waypoints, 1 through 3, and those are technically considered separate waypoints in addition to your 3 waypoints that are stored into your Tomcat's own navigational computer. You can also have a data link surface target and a data link fixed point. And fixed point FP basically you can use it to set a waypoint up that when you fly your Tomcat over it, you can basically do a quick INS fix, and it'll recalibrate your INS weight system. The Tomcat's INS system can get a bit out of whack on long flights, so you can use it to basically fix your Tomcat's INS so it's a bit less unaligned on its flight. It won't be ever perfectly aligned mid-flight, but you can use it to at least roughly put it back in order so that you can navigate roughly to the target area. And that's it for your fixed points. I will put them in the comments down below, so that way when you do your own mission editors, you can just quickly look that up. It is also in the Tomcat's manual that comes with the your DCS install and online. It's towards the very bottom. It's in there. You can look it all up in there. Next up, we want to go over the radios, and this is fairly simple. Your pilot has access only to a UHF radio. UHF covers bands from basically roughly 200 to roughly 350 or 360 or 70. So you can cover your UHF band there with your pilot. For a VHF radio and communications, you have the Rio in the backseat has access to a VHF and UHF radio, and he has access to 30 pre-stored radio frequencies across with the 30 channels here. Pilot has only access to a measly 20 stored radio channels, which is actually standard for most of your DCS aircraft. For NATO, 20 channels seems to be your normal amount of storage channels you're able to get on almost every aircraft. Additional properties, we go back to a model of our Tomcat here for the additional properties. M61 Vulcan burst mode. These are all options, by the way, that most of these options can be set on the ground. You can set the burst length for the cannon. You can either have a burst of 100 rounds, 50 rounds, 200 rounds, or manual. I go for a burst of 100. That gives you basically 6 full squeezes of the trigger before you're out of gun ammo. And 100 rounds is more than enough if you get them on target to destroy your enemy aircraft. The AN/ALE 39 loadout, you can set how much flares and chaff you want. Keep in mind, this is the only way you can add flares to your Tomcat, so I tend to go flare heavy in my countermeasure builds, just because I end up in more of in the close-in fights all the time, and plus, on some of the servers I fly and they like to add in man pads, so I always like to go for a full 60 flares loadout, and you're not going to lose any chaff because there's an option down here to fill the LAU 138 with chaff, and go ahead and select that for basically as standard to make sure that your players as well as yourself has chaff, has a whole bunch of chaff to play around with for dealing with radar threats. INS reference alignment stored. This basically is your quick stored heading alignment, and this helps you get your Tomcat up and aligned faster. So always have that selected, unless you want to have some scenario where the Tomcat has been decommissioned for a while, it's in a hangar, and you're trying to get it up and ready as fast as possible, or or the Tomcat hasn't had its INS aligned for a while, and they just shut it down and moved it around, and now it doesn't have an alignment. So you can deselect that in a couple of cases where you're trying to set up a special scenario, but in general, just keep it aligned. Just keep it aligned, keep it selected. That way, you can get up in the air relatively fast. TACAN channel preset. You can set this to 0 for an automatic TACAN channel preset. I like to always manually put it in to double check to make sure that it's going to the right TACAN channel. So, in this case, Visnani Air Base in DCS has a channel TACAN its TACAN channel is 22 X-ray, and you set the band down here. So that way you get your TACAN channel preset for your players. You can also preset your Um, it's called an ILS channel, but technically it's an ICLS channel preset. Uh, just because it's an the Tomcat doesn't have an ILS for landing at airports. It has a ICLS, which is an instrument carrier landing system for landing on carriers, and the ICLS channel can be preset to whatever you want it to be. As this is a land-based airport that our Tomcat is taking off of, it doesn't really matter what that's set to. KY28 encryption key doesn't really matter in DCS really. It's just a thing that you might want to play around with, but just set it to 1 and you won't run into any problems with DCS. And if you're doing a air start or you're doing anything with laser guided bombs, you want to keep a note of your laser codes. This isn't the laser code for your lantern pod. This is the laser code that is programmed into the bombs. So before you take off, make sure that you have these laser codes set. You can do it either here in the mission editor, and if you're creating a mission editor and a mission, and you're having a laser designator or a JTAC or AFAC or any other aircraft designating the bombs for the player, make sure that this matches the laser code that the JTAC has, or else the bombs will miss, even though everything looks right. Especially for air start missions, you want to make sure for an air start mission this matches whatever JTAC you want the player to use, because there's no way to change the bomb's laser code once the Tomcat is airborne. So just double check and make sure everything matches up there with what you have planned for your mission, and you'll be good to go. And that's it for all the special options and a loadout for the Tomcat as far as that goes. General mission planning notes for the Tomcat. Don't be afraid to set the Tomcat out on long missions. With 20,000 pounds of fuel, I have found that without doing any air-to-air refueling, I am able to do missions of 80 plus minutes without having to do any air-to-air refueling, and that is with air-to-air combat involved and getting back to the boat with fuel to spare. It's not a lot of fuel to spare, but there is still plenty of fuel for me to do a couple of landing attempts. So definitely Tomcat is really good for your longer missions. AIM-54 Phoenixes are a lot of fun to play around with, but don't be afraid on your missions with the Tomcat. If you want to give your Tomcat pilot a little bit more challenge and or kind of simulate the fact that these Phoenixes are limited, don't be afraid to swap out Phoenixes with Sparrows. You can have loadouts also with the Phoenix, like this one up here, where you have only 2 Phoenix missiles, but then 3 Sparrows. So don't be afraid to play around with Sparrows versus Phoenixes. You don't have to always give your players the maximum amount of Phoenixes. Also keep in mind the Tomcat, especially the F-14B, is a capable air-to-ground platform, and at least in a limited sense. In fact, the F-14B is named the Bombcat because of its ability to use laser-guided bombs with the Lantern Pod, and plus of just the fact that it has such a huge amount of carrying capacity in this tunnel here for bombs. So you can have plenty of fun just setting up areas where the Tomcat has to basically saturate an area with iron bombs or Zuni rockets. You can have a lot of fun doing air-to-ground in the Tomcat, and I do as well. And in general, with the Tomcat, there's one other thing I should mention. It pairs very well up with, it pairs nicely up with the E2 Hawkeye. The E2 Hawkeye can actually link up to the Tomcat with Link 4 data link, as well as the Tomcat can link up to a carrier with Link 4 as well. So if you want to have a integrated sensor network with the Tomcat, you can definitely do that over the Tomcat's Link 4 with the Tomcat's own radar providing information, as well as the E2 Hawkeye and the carrier's own Aegis sensor suite. It can all make a nice data link network for the Tomcat to perform missions in for your air-to-air combat air patrols. Also, when you're setting up missions for the Tomcat, because it's a naval aircraft, make sure when you set up the carrier to set up Link 4, ICLS, and TACAN. Make sure to set up TACAN especially for the carrier, because the Tomcat, otherwise, or even your other carrier-based aircraft like the F-18Cs, and eventually when we get them, the A-7Es and the A-6Es, uh, they can't magically find the carrier with the INS, because the INS is a fixed point in space and the carrier does move. So you definitely want to make sure that when you're setting up naval operations with your Tomcats, make sure you have the carrier turn on its TACAN. And that's pretty much it with the Tomcat and the mission editor notes I wanted to point out. Go ahead, have lots of fun experimenting with the Tomcat, have lots of fun have lots of fun putting it up against even modern fighters like flankers and MiG-29 Fulcrums. You can easily set up instances of it fighting also its more historical foes like the MiG-23 Flogger, and you can then also have it fight even like MiG-20, like a whole swarm of MiG-21s. Go ahead, have fun with your Tomcat missions, put it up against anything. It's a very capable platform. It's an older platform, but it's still very capable in the right hands, and you can have a whole bunch of fun with missions, doing with ground attack, air-to-air missions. Just go ahead, have fun with the Tomcat, and I will see you in a couple of weeks where we'll be covering another aircraft. And until then, this is LockOS, signing out.